The Bnei Menashe are a small group within the indigenous people of India's northeastern border states of Manipur and Mizoram. Since the late 20th century, they claim descent from one of the lost tribes of Israel and have adopted the practice of Judaism. The Bnei Menashe are made up of Mizor, Kuki and Chin peoples, who all speak Tibeto-Burman languages, and whose ancestors migrated into northeast India from Burma mostly in the 17th and 18th centuries. They are called Chin in Burma. In the late 20th century, an Israeli rabbi investigating their claims named them Bnei Menashe, based on their account of descent from Menashe. Most of the peoples in these two northeast states, who number more than 3.7 million, do not identify with these claims. Some have supported other movements to separate from India. Prior to conversion in the 19th century to Christianity by Welsh Baptist missionaries, the Chin, Kuki, and Mizor peoples were animists. Among their practices were ritual headhunting. Since the late 20th century, some of these peoples have begun following Messianic Judaism. The Bnei Menashe are a small group who started studying and practicing Judaism since the 1970s in a desire to return to what they believe is the religion of ancestors. The total population of Manipur and Mizoram is more than 3.7 million. The Bnei Menashe number below 9,000, several hundred have emigrated to Israel. In 2003-2004, DNA testing showed that several hundred men of this group had no evidence of Middle Eastern ancestry. A Kolkata study in 2005, which has been criticized, suggested that a small number of women sampled may have some Middle Eastern ancestry. But this may also have resulted from intermarriage during the thousands of years of migration. In the early 21st century, Israel halted immigration by Bnei Menashe. It resumed after a change in government. The chief rabbi of Israel ruled in 2005 that the Bnei Menashe was recognized as part of a lost tribe, allowing Aliyah after formal conversion. History. Biblical background. In the time of the First Temple, Israel was divided into two kingdoms. The southern one, known as the Kingdom of Judah, was made up mostly of the tribes of Judah, Benjamin and Levi. Most Jews today are descended from the southern kingdom. The northern kingdom of Israel was made up of the remaining 10 tribes. In approximately 721 BCE, the Assyrians invaded the northern kingdom, exiled the 10 tribes living there, and enslaved them in Assyria. Oral history. The Bnei Menashe say their oral history of 2,700 years describes their escape from slavery in Assyria to Media, Persia. From there they moved to what is now Afghanistan, mostly through less traveled areas to avoid being recaptured and taken back into slavery. From Afghanistan they traveled toward Hindu Kush and proceeded to Tibet, then to Kaifeng, reaching the Chinese city around 240 BCE. The Bnei Menashe believe that while in China, their ancestors were enslaved again. After 20 years of settling in China at around and between 220–206 BCE by Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of China enslaved their ancestors to build the Wall of China. Due to the heavy work, short deadlines, and difficult conditions, their ancestors were forced to leave China. They then moved to the southwest border of China, a hilly region between India and Burma where they lived freely. During their years there, many of their remaining Israelite descendants were killed. The survivors then assimilated with the locals. The former slaves fled and lived in caves. When the group was expelled from China in 100 CE, their leather scrolls were confiscated and burned. At that point different groups went in various directions. Some went down the Mekong River into Vietnam, Siam, Malaysia, and the Philippines. Others migrated to Burma and into northeast India. These people were referred to by others as Shinlung, the cave dwellers. Today, descendants of these peoples are known locally as Shinlung. Some Kuki, Mizor, Lushai or Ma. In 1894, Christian missionaries reached Manipur, India, and worked to convert the local peoples. The Kuki, having been brought up with an oral history of descent from an ancestor known as Manmase or Manmasi, and other stories, believed they heard familiar elements in some of the Bible stories. This contributed to their decision to convert to Christianity. They believe one of their songs, which they think dates from the ancient migration, refers to what they have learned is the Israelites' exodus from Egypt, return to Judaism as of the 21st century. The Bnei Menashe have come to believe that the legendary Kuki Masor ancestor Manmasi was the Hebrew Menashe, son of Joseph. This group of Kuki Masor people began a messianic movement during the 1950s. While believing that Yeshua is the promised Messiah for all Israelites, these pioneers in the early 1960s adopted observance of the Jewish Sabbath, holidays, dietary laws and other Jewish customs and traditions which they learned from books. They had no connections with other Jewish groups in the diaspora or in Israel. On May 31, 1972, some Messianic communities founded the Manipur Jewish Organization, the first Jewish organization in northeast India. After these people established contacts with other Jewish religious groups in Israel and other countries, they began to practice more traditional rabbinic Judaism in the 1980s and 1990s. Rabbi Eliyahu Avichai is the founder of Amishav, an organization dedicated to finding the lost tribes and facilitating Aliyah. He investigated this group's claims to Jewish descent in the 1980s. He named the group as Bnei Menashe. In the late 20th century, many of the Bnei Menashe started studying normative Judaism. Hundreds emigrated to Israel, some completing the required formal conversions there to be accepted as Jews. Critics thought the government's policy of settling the Bnei Menashe immigrants in the unstable Judea, Samaria and Gaza Strip was part of a recruiting campaign to help increase Israel's population. Others criticized these people as economic migrants, and not true Jews. In 2005, the chief rabbinate of Israel accepted them as Jews due to the devotion displayed by their practice through the decades, but still required formal ritual conversion to be accepted as Jews. Later that year, Israel began to refuse to issue visas to these peoples after India objected to Israeli teams entering the northeast states to perform mass conversions and arrange Aliyah. History of the Kuki Masor prior to their conversion to Christianity in the 19th century. The Kuki Masor practiced animism, ritual headhunting of enemies was part of their culture. Depending upon their affiliations, each tribe identifies primarily as Kuki, Masor, or Chin. The people identify most closely with their subtribes in the villages, each of which has its own distinct dialect and identity. They are indigenous peoples, who had migrated in waves from East Asia and settled in what is now northeastern India. They have no written history, but their legends refer to a beloved homeland that they had to leave, called Sinlung, Chinlung. The various tribes speak languages that are branches of indigenous Tibeto-Burman. Influence of revivalism during the first Welsh missionary-led Christian revivalism movement, which swept through the Mysore Hills in 1906. The missionaries prohibited indigenous festivals, feasts, and traditional songs and chants. After missionaries abandoned this policy during the 1919-24 revival, the Mysore began writing their own hymns, incorporating indigenous elements. They created a unique form of syncretic Christian worship. Christianity has been characterized by its absorption of elements of local cultures, wherever it has been introduced. Dr. Shalva Weil, a senior researcher and noted anthropologist at Hebrew University, wrote in her paper, Dual Conversion Among the Shinlung of Northeast. Revivalism is a recurrent phenomenon distinctive of the Welsh form of Presbyterianism. Certain members of the congregation who easily fall into ecstasy are believed to be visited by the Holy Ghost, and the utterings are received as prophecies. McCall had recorded several incidents of revivalism, including the Kelkang incident, in which 3 men spoke in tongues, claiming to be the medium through which God spoke to men. Their following was large and widespread until they clashed with the colonial superintendent. He put down the movement and removed the sorcery. In 2004 study Weil says, although there is no documentary evidence linking the tribal peoples in northeast India with the myth of the lost Israelites, it appears likely that, as with revivalism, the concept was introduced by the missionaries as part of their general millenarian leanings. In the 19th and 20th centuries, Christian missionaries discovered lost tribes in far-flung places. Their enthusiasm for identifying such peoples as part of the Israelite tribes was related to the desire to speed up the Messianic era and bring on the redemption. Based on his experience in China, for example, Scottish missionary Rev. T.F. Torrance wrote China's Ancient Israelites, expounding a theory that the Qiang people were lost Israelites. This theory has not been supported by any more rigorous studies. Some of the Mizrahi Kichin say they have an oral tradition that the tribe traveled through Persia, Afghanistan, Tibet, China and on to India, where it eventually settled in the northeastern states of Manipur and Mizoram. According to Tongkorao Aviel Hangsheng, leader of the Bnei Menashe in Imphal, the capital of Manipur, when the Bible was translated into local languages in the 1970s, the people began to study it themselves. Hangsheng said, and we found that the stories, the customs and practices of the Israeli people were very similar to ours. So we thought that we must be one of the lost tribes. After making contact with Israelis, they began to study normative Judaism and establish several synagogues. Hundreds of Mizrahi Kichin emigrated to Israel. They were required to formally convert to be accepted as Jews because their history was not documented. Also, given their long migration and intermarriage, they had lost the maternal ancestry of Jews. Work of Aliyah groups, Amishav and Shavei Israel. In the late 20th century, the Israeli Rabbi Eliyahu Avichai founded Amishav, an organization dedicated to locating descendants of the lost tribes of Israel and assisting Aliyah. In 1983, he first learned of the Messianic Jewish group in northeastern India, after meeting Zaidan Changi, an insurance saleswoman and former teacher who came from the area. She had traveled to Israel in 1981 to present papers at seminars about her people's connection to Judaism. During the 1980s, Avichai traveled to northeast India several times to investigate the people's claims. He helped the people do research and collect historic documentation. The people were observed to have some practices similar to Judaism. 3 festivals annually similar to those of Jews. Funeral rites, birth and marriage ceremonies have similarities to ancient Judaism. Historical claim of descent from a great ancestor, Manmasi, whose descriptions are similar to those of Manasseh, son of Joseph. Local legend less than where describes the presence of remnants of the lost Jewish tribe of Manasseh more than 1,000 years ago in a cave in southwestern China, whose members migrated across Thailand into northeastern India. Believing that these people were descendants of Israelites, Avichai named the group Bnei Menashe. He began to teach them normative Orthodox Judaism. He prepared to pay for their aliyah with funds provided by groups such as the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews. This U.S.-Israeli organization raises funds from evangelical Christians for Jewish causes to support the Second Coming. The Israeli government did not recognize the Messianic groups in India as candidates for Aliyah. Several years later, the rabbi stepped aside as a leader of Amishav in favor of Michael Freund. The younger man was a Jerusalem Post columnist and former deputy director of communications and policy planning in the Prime Minister's office. The 2 men quarreled. Freund founded another organization, Shavei Israel, also devoted to supporting Aliyah by descendants of lost tribes. Each of the two men have attracted the support of some Bnei Menashe in Israel. Kuki-Mizor tribal rivalries and clans have also played a role in the split, with some groups supporting one man and some the other. Freund uses some of his private fortune to support Shavei Israel. It has helped provide Jewish education for the Bnei Menashe in Aizawl and Imphal, the capitals of two northeast Indian states. In mid-2005, with the help of Shavei Israel and the local council of Kiryat Arba, the Bnei Menashe opened its first community center in Israel. They have built several synagogues in India. In July 2005, they completed a mikveh in Mizoram under the supervision of Israeli rabbis. This is used in Orthodox Jewish practice, and its use is required as part of the formal Orthodox process of conversion of candidates to Judaism. Shortly after, Bnei Menashe built a mikveh in Manipur. DNA testing results. Observers thought that DNA testing might indicate whether there was Middle Eastern ancestry among the Bnei Menashe. Some resisted such testing, acknowledging that their ancestors had intermarried with other peoples but saying that did not change their sense of identification as Jews. In 2003, author Hillel Holken helped arrange genetic testing of Mizor Kuki peoples. He had written about them in his Across the Sabbath River, In Search of a Lost Tribe of Israel. A total of 350 genetic samples were tested at Haifa's Technion, Israel Institute of Technology under the auspices of Professor Carl Skorecki. According to the late Isaac Hmarantoate, a scholar involved with the project, researchers found no genetic evidence of Middle Eastern ancestry for the Mizorchin Kuki men. The study has not been published in a peer-reviewed journal. In December 2004, Kolkata's Central Forensic Science Laboratory posted a paper at Genome Biology on the Internet. This had not been peer-reviewed. They tested a total of 414 people from tribal communities of the state of Mizoram. They found no evidence among the men of Y-DNA haplotypes indicating Middle Eastern origin. Instead, the haplotypes were distinctly East and Southeast Asian in origin. In 2005, additional tests of mtDNA were conducted for 50 women from these communities. The researchers said they found some evidence of Middle Eastern origin, which may have been an indicator of intermarriage during the people's lengthy migration period. While DNA is not used as a determinant of Jewish ancestry, it can be an indicator. It has been found in the Y-DNA among descendants in some other populations distant from the Middle East who claim Jewish descent, some of whose ancestors are believed to have been male Jewish traders. Israeli Professor Skorecki said of the Kolkata studies that the geneticists did not do a complete genetic sequencing of all the DNA, and therefore, it is hard to rely on the conclusions derived from a "partial sequencing." And they themselves admit this, he added. The absence of a genetic match still does not say that the Kuki do not have origins in the Jewish people, as it is possible that after thousands of years it is difficult to identify the traces of the common genetic origin. However, a positive answer can give a significant indication, BBC News reported. The Central Forensic Institute in Calcutta suggests that while the masculine side of the tribes bears no links to Israel, the feminine side suggests a genetic profile with Middle Eastern people that may have arisen through intermarriage. The social scientist Lev Greenberg commented that right-wing Jewish groups wanted such conversions of distant people to boost the population in areas disputed by the Palestinians. In November 2006, an Indian historian claimed to have found a genetic link between his northern Indian Pathan clan and the lost tribe of Ephraim. Author Hillel Holken said, "Here's no such thing as Jewish DNA. There is a genetic pattern which is very common in the Middle East. 40% of Jews worldwide have it and 60% do not have it. But many non-Jews and people in the Middle East have it also." Acceptance. In April 2005, the Sephardi chief rabbi Shlomo Amar, one of Israel's two chief rabbis, formally accepted the Bnei Menashe as descendants of one of the lost tribes after years of review of their claims and other research. His decision allows the Bnei Menashe to immigrate as Jews to Israel under the country's law of return, but he requires them to undergo formal conversion to Judaism to be fully accepted as Jews, because of their long interruption from the people. Most ethnic Mizrahi have rejected the Bnei Menashe claim of Jewish origin. They believe their peoples are indigenous to Asia, as supported by the Y-DNA test results. Academics in Israel and elsewhere also have serious questions about any Jewish ancestry for this group. By 2006, some 1,700 Bnei Menashe had moved to Israel, where they were settled in the West Bank and Gaza Strip. They were required to undergo Orthodox conversion to Judaism, including study and immersion in a mikveh. The immigrants were put in the settlements as these offered cheaper housing and living expenses than some other areas. The Bnei Menashe composed the largest immigrant population in the Gaza Strip before Israel withdrew its settlers from the area. Learning Hebrew has been a great challenge, especially for the older generation, for whom the phonology of their native Indic and Semitic languages makes Hebrew especially challenging. Younger members have had more opportunities to learn Hebrew, as they are more involved in society. Some have gained jobs as soldiers, others as nurses' aides for the elderly and infirm.